everybody. It's time for another edition of Talking Shit. I'm DeAndre with my beautiful guest here. We call her Lizzy. Her first name is Elizabeth. And she is going to be talking to us today about women's issues. And we're grateful to have her here. Lizzy was also a part of our panel discussion video on what's been going on in the Gaza Strip and how the Israeli government is massacring those people over there. Let's get right into it. Welcome. Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, look, we have twin little water glasses here. A toast to empowerment. Yeah, good to be here. Okay, what's going on, Lizzy? I'm so grateful you're here. I'm glad that you decided to come over. And who are you? I mean, I know that you are part of the Empowered Arab Sisterhood, but what are you doing nowadays?
What am I doing now?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm part of the Empowered Arab Sisterhood, also founding sister. So we founded this national organization at UCLA in 2012, first chapter, and it's expanding. So it's really exciting to see that grow.
Wow.
We already have a chapter at UC Davis, and gonna go to a few more this coming year, so that's great. But also, I'm working now.
Right.
I'm a working woman.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I'm just transitioning out of university life.
Into working.
Yeah,
absolutely. So what is the Empowered Sisterhood? What's your message? What are you trying to convey with this program, with this organization?
Well, the Empowered Arab Sisterhood, I think, really functions as like a safe space for Arab women, and it's just like, for me, my experience growing up as an Arab woman, a Lebanese Christian actually, has been interesting, particularly following 9/11, which today is the 13th anniversary. So I know a lot of people remember exactly where they were when those planes hit the towers, and for me, it wasn't just a moment that I remember, but a lot changed after that, and I became very aware of my identity, and this is an experience that a lot of Arab Americans have had, where they notice people reacting differently to them, being kind of identified and judged automatically. Yeah, exactly. And I remember my mom started making me wear a cross to school to identify me as separate from the terrorists that look like me, right? So just having to take that extra step to identify yourself as not a threat to the general population, I think, is an interesting experiment in cultural identity and assimilation into American, culture, where we're supposed to be a melting pot, but it's an experience that a lot of people of color have. So I identify myself first and foremost as a woman of color.
I knew there was a reason why we got along, because as a black person, I've been dealing with, I'm 47 years old, it's like join the club, I guess. You're absolutely correct.
Another thing that connects these, people of color struggles in the United States is that it's a very tough situation to identify yourself as an American in a country that is attacking your people. For me, it's the homeland of my ancestors, and for many in this country, it's their communities and their neighborhoods and their schools that are being militarized and being caged instead of having taking money away from human services, health services, education, and putting them into these militarized police forces.
These bombs and bazookas and all the stuff that kills people.
Exactly. So it's a direct correlation between, I think, not only the militarization of police here and the decline of standards of living and the increased racism that's becoming more and more blatant. Thank God people are finally speaking out about it. And taking to the streets, but also the imperial wars of aggression that we're waging abroad, specifically in the Middle East, that's taking so much of our capacity and our money, our hard-earned tax dollars that should be invested, in our communities, in the United States, in our God,
I've just been tweeting about that, because it's just like there's a domestic erosion taking place in our country. And that money that we could use to stop that, with as far as helping people with school and all this debt with the college debt and stuff. It's like, what about saving a couple of billions of
Yeah.
dollars on bombs.
I
and-
remember you also mentioning that in our last
Yeah, I
podcast.
just, I think it's ridiculous.
It's a recurring issue. And
What about the layers? I mean, because not only are you a woman of color, but you're also a woman. So you have that bigot. You know, it's sort of like a bigot's, heaven. You have first you are a woman of color. Then you're also a person who's been educated. I mean, that's a strike against you. And then you're also like, I mean, it just keeps going and going. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I thank you for
There's-
being a part of empowering people. I think
Yeah.
it's so important.
One of the other things that I kind of wanted to mention too is in terms of the politics of feminism and being embracing your womanhood,
Right.
and being a person of color at the same time. It's very difficult, particularly coming from a history of colonization and Western imperialism. That
Right.
we look at the Middle East and we look at women in the Middle East, and there's this automatic stereotype where it's like, Arab women are oppressed, victim, and they're shackled by their religion, and
Right.
the patriarchy is so terrible. And there's elements of truth to that,
Right.
definitely. The problem is, and one of the reasons why I think the Empowered Arab Sisterhood is so valuable for me is that the empowering women and identifying women's issues and trying to come up with solutions to them has been twisted in a very sick way by liberal feminists in the United States, for example, like justifying invading Iraq and Afghanistan as a women's issue. Laura Bush's quote is that fighting terrorism is a fight for the dignity of women, and that's absolutely just a very, very twisted logic that we are using women who have been victimized and who have real issues with oppression, tokenizing that experience to justify bombing them. Because when you have a war, you are not, it's not to help women. Everyone suffers at the same time.
Absolutely.
There's no discrimination, right? And I think that taking control of that narrative of what it means to be liberated as a woman in society needs to be done by the people who are impacted by it themselves. So as an Arab woman, I think it's paramount to our struggle as our anti-colonial, anti-racist, anti-sexist struggles that we speak for ourselves and not let other people speak for us. So that's kind of one of the main projects of the Empowered Arab Sisterhood.
I love hearing this stuff because in this information, rather, I'd like to label it that, not just stuff. And the idea that somehow America and its little corporate, marionette people, the people who actually run. I was listening to Obama's speech last night, and I had a couple of, I supported the president for several years, and now I've really been very frustrated with my president. The idea that somehow we're going to kill enough people, men, women, and children, to get the idea of killing people off the table so we can then negotiate peace just sounds like a bunch of bullshit to me. I just think that's so stupid.
Yeah.
That if we kill enough people, that somehow killing people is going to vanish.
Yeah.
And instead of starting with the meaningful, what empowers, women as far as like your, with the Arab sisterhood, is like, there are some women in these countries that are fighting back, that are, and they don't need us to bomb. For example, I heard there was a film where this woman, was like boycotting the idea that women can't drive in certain countries over there, and they were driving, and they were sneaking and driving, and they were filming it.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Saudi Arabian women were driving, and I'm saying that to say that there is an energy and a momentum of Arab women who are not waiting on America to bomb their country to make changes. That's like, you know what I mean? It's just I don't like the dishonesty.
Yeah.
And I go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, the whole notion that we need to have, to use Spivak's quote, "white men saving brown women from brown men," is, obviously the colonial undercurrents of that are very blatant, but it reinforces the idea that these women are passive victims, and
Right.
that they're not negotiating or resisting or struggling in their own right.
Right.
And the problem when the Western liberal feminist machine kind of uses that and targets, takes the idea of like struggles for gender justice and uses that as an indictment against Arab culture in general. What
Right.
that does is it makes it harder
Right.
for women to fight back in their own communities, because then if they talk about sexism, they're seen as being complicit with the imperial aggressor, saying
Right.
like, well, now you're supporting what they're saying.
Absolutely.
instead of you're basically splintering our movement.
Right.
And which it has, it's very tough to struggle within that, because you're fighting colonialism. So what's more important? Is it like getting rid of these exterior and foreign forces that are pushing everyone down, or also fighting patriarchy? And the problem is it's never apparently the right time to talk about women's issues.
Right.
So if anything, it just makes it more difficult for women to have their voices heard and respected.
Absolutely. I've seen that in the black community. I remember when the president was first elected that there was a hot mic episode with the Reverend Jesse Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
who made some very assertive comments about the president sort of being the great black hope, and now everybody who was doing all this hard work within the black community, like you're talking about with the Arab Sisters, all of a sudden that's going to be now extinguished, because now we have this big ideologue coming along and he's going to save us all, which really kind of messes up the sort of, there's a grassroots feel
Definitely.
doing things to empower oneself. Malcolm X was very adamant about that, in lieu of some of his kind of ideas that were way too aggressive when he was younger. But as he got older, Malcolm really explained himself, and he wanted a lot of self-empowerment to come from an organic place in our soul, rather than some great white hope coming and giving us permission to actually have this sort of sociological inner position with oneself about empowering your own community.
Exactly.
And that's one of the reasons why I have such a problem with America being, sort of welfare office for everyone, and you just call in and let America know that their oil or their interest is about to be threatened, and then here come the bombs.
Exactly.
Yeah, see, we helped. We're America. Now give us the oil and the right to, dominate you. So anyway, what about the idea of women empowerment, especially when it comes to women of color? And we'll kind of finalize our talk with some of the stuff that's been going on in the news lately with the violence and the domestic, the abuse of women. What's your take on some of the stuff you've been hearing as far as like women sort of being these passive people who sort of just wait on someone to come and save them, opposed to what besides some of the stuff that you're doing, what do you see as an overall solution for women in regards to having power and the kind of freedom that so many of our other fellow citizens on this planet get to enjoy at a certain... like people who have a lot of money, for example, they can kind of do whatever they want or whatever. Like this woman who was killed, and I'm not going to mention her name, who was killed by her husband, who just happened to be a very popular athlete, who the trial went on, all this stuff, and then all of a sudden he's free, and this woman is dead, She was killed in cold blood. What's your take on women, as a people, like the empowerment of women as a people? Where do you see yourself as a woman, and where do you see women in that kind of that struggle?
Yeah, I think, you kind of started that question. Maybe
It's a long one.
referencing perhaps the Ray Rice video and the whole NFL scandal. And I think like one of the issues with when we have such widespread domestic violence is that the first reaction that a lot of people have is, well, why did she stay? Or why didn't she see the signs earlier? How did she contribute to her own situation, which is very, victim blaming and definitely not okay at all.
Right.
And I feel like the problem comes down to the way that we have what's it called, conditioned women and men to interact with each other.
Right.
From the first place, the way we grow up, we're taught as women that, you know, the number one thing that you should strive for is to have a husband and to live happily ever after. And, you know, even in many families still, especially in from where I come from, it's like marriage is more important than getting an education, or there's all these things that basically lead to a culture of dependency that then women find themselves trapped in, but who's benefiting at the end of the day? And it's this male supremacist kind of, who's the one, you know, it's not, there's the hashtag not all men, right? But yes, all women suffer, even though not all men are perpetrators, or maybe not all men are contributing to domestic violence, but they all benefit regardless.
Absolutely.
So I think that domestic violence is just one form of violence on this continuum of this war on women that traverses, you know, economic forms of violence. The fact that women's labor is undervalued, that we have that traditional women's work, as in care work, reproductive work, you know, raising a family, cleaning the house, that these things are not valued as productive labor, when actually without women doing that work, you could not have the labor force that goes and does the reproductive work. You know?
Absolutely.
When you think of the economy as a whole, and we think of reproductive work, we only think of like the office and the factory and whatever, and that's the only thing that counts, when there's this entire aspect of the family and the reproductive labor behind it. That is basically slave labor at this point. We have, you know, half of our population that is performing this work unremunerated or very undervalued. For example, Jerry Brown just, I think it was yesterday, signed a new law giving paid sick days to California workers, which is a really, you know, which is great, because too many workers have been forced to go to work sick, or they can't, you know, they can't afford to take the day off for a loved one that's ill because they need the money to put food on the table. So having 3 paid sick days per worker is great, but there's a huge caveat, which is 360,000 in-home care service workers, which are for the majority low-income working women of color. And it's just goes to show how women workers are so undervalued in the economic sense, in the social sense, and the contributions that they bring to our culture and our health and our well-being is discarded, even when it comes to the law, right?
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I heard a comedian say a few weeks ago that the number one threat on the planet is not bombs or not necessarily certain types of cancer. The number one threat on the planet for women is men. We are the number one threat on the planet for women, men. And so the comedian went on to say that when you are in a male's presence, so you not only do you have all this other stuff going on, but you have to wonder if you're with a bear or a tiger. I mean, because of the and just the level of that. The humor is there, but it's also like the way things are politically structured. Women are treated as if, you know, we're sort of helping them remember their place, you know, and that's all we're going to do for them. And somehow we could just help them remember that, yeah, you're going to work, even if you work the way we work, and as often as we work, we still got to give you that lower amount of money and that lower amount of respect.
People don't realize women still make 77 cents on the dollar as a man, and women of color, you know, African American women make 71 cents, and Hispanic women make 61 cents on the dollar for a white man. So it's definitely that sexism and racism overlap and produce, you know, multiple layers of oppression that make the situation very, very hard, survival-wise. And just one last linkage between these various types of violence. When women's labor is not valued, and when women are, you know, making less, and the labor segmentation forces them into like service work, you have a system that encourages domestic violence, that
Right.
enables it, because then
Right.
it's harder to leave a situation when you're economically dependent on your male partner.
Right.
Or, you have kids to care for, and, our state doesn't subsidize childcare, and how's the woman supposed to go and make her own income? And then if she leaves the house, she's criminalized for neglecting her children.
Absolutely.
So there's so many different ways that.
There's so many different ways that the system is lubricated
Yeah.
to stay in a place of just total self-destructive. I think it's self-destructive. I don't believe that terrorism and all these things that we're protecting people from is not dangerous. I'm just saying that our own ignorance towards some of the issues you're talking about, I think that is the real erosion of what's safe for us. In other words, if we're not educated or empowered or helpful in these meaningful issues that you're bringing up that really can change things, then aren't we sort of just feeding the same old beast of BS that goes on? We're completely out of time. I just want to talk real quick about some of the other things you're working on, or some of the new things, other issues with your organization, or what new projects, or anything new happening, or anything up and coming.
Well, I think you might have mentioned it earlier. I'm working with the 9 to 5 National Association of Working Women.
Yeah, recap that.
In Los Angeles. So basically we're an organization, a nonprofit that works with low-wage working women to affect changes in policy on a local, state, and federal level. One of the big wins was the paid sick days, minus that whole caveat of home care service providers. But another thing we're working on is like anti-wage theft and ordinance in Los Angeles. $26 million per week is stolen from low-wage workers in LA alone, through not being paid time and a half for overtime, through being denied meal and rest breaks, just plain not getting minimum wage.
Indentured servitude right here.
Yeah, so we're trying to hold, our elected officials accountable and also make progressive change.
We're going to have to get Lizzy a security team. She's going to need to be escorted around this community with the type of damage she's doing to these...
to the system.
Exactly, and I appreciate... We're going to have her back. But that's all the time we have. Once again, I want to thank you for coming. That's all the time we have for now. Join us again on our next episode of Talking Shit. I'll see you when it's time to eat.